60 years of silence collapsed in a single vote. For decades, Burkina Faso stood as an exception on the African map, neither legalizing nor criminalizing same-sex relations, a quiet neutrality that few noticed and fewer questioned. But in September 2025, the nation's transitional parliament ended that silence with a unanimous decision. Homosexuality would now be punished with prison, fines, and deportation. This was not only a change in law, it was a shift in voice. For more than half a century, the state looked away while society whispered its judgment. Now the silence has been replaced by a declaration, and behind that declaration stands a question larger than Burkina Faso itself. Is this about morality, or is this about sovereignty? Stay with us, because this is not just about one law in Ouagadougou. It is about how a continent defines its future. Subscribe and continue with us. What happens when a small, landlocked country dares to set its own compass of values? Does sovereignty mean strength, or does it risk isolation? The answer may shape not only Burkina Faso's destiny, but Africa's path in the century ahead. History often turns not with explosions, but with the scratching of pens across paper. In Burkina Faso, that turning came in September 2025, when the transitional parliament cast a unanimous vote to criminalize homosexuality. With a single decision, the nation that once lived in legal silence declared a new position, one that aligned it with much of the continent, rather than setting it apart. To understand the weight of that decision, we must return to the beginning. When Burkina Faso gained independence from France in 1960, its new legal code looked different from those of its neighbors. Unlike former British colonies that inherited restrictive laws banning same-sex relations, Burkina Faso's books were left blank on the matter. For decades, there was no statute forbidding homosexual acts, no paragraph prescribing punishment. On paper, at least, the country was neutral. But neutrality is never the same as freedom. Social conservatism, rooted in religion and cultural tradition, shaped the fabric of daily life. Conversations about sexuality were rare, often dismissed as taboo, and condemnation lurked beneath the surface. The law's silence provided space, but not acceptance. People did not march openly in the streets, but they did not face the risk of prison simply for who they loved. It was a delicate balance, fragile, unspoken, and temporary. That balance began to crack after the coup of 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power amid turmoil in the Sahel. His government inherited not only a nation besieged by insurgency and economic hardship, but also one caught in the rising tide of continental conservatism. Across Africa, governments were rewriting laws to reflect long-held social norms, often framed as defiance of foreign influence. Uganda had passed one of the harshest anti-LGBT legislations in the world, complete with the death penalty for so-called aggravated acts. Nigeria had long enforced its prohibitions. Ghana's parliament debated restrictions of its own. Mali, governed by another junta, had already enacted a ban. In this wave, Burkina Faso looked increasingly like an outlier. And so in 2024, the transitional government drafted an amendment to the family code. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, the law explicitly defined homosexuality as a criminal offense. Justice Minister Edaso Rodrigue Baya justified the proposal as a defense of society against what he called bizarre behavior, language that resonated with a population where more than 90% identified with a religion. 1 year later, the draft became law. Parliament's unanimous vote removed any pretense of neutrality. The law prescribed 2 to 5 years in prison, financial penalties, and deportation for foreigners found guilty. It was a clean break with the past, a line drawn where once there was only silence. Why does this matter? Because the silence of Burkina Faso had long stood as a quiet counterpoint to its neighbors. For more than 60 years, it symbolized the possibility of a legal order that neither punished nor condoned, that left morality to society rather than the state. When that silence ended, the symbolism shifted. The soil that had absorbed decades of unspoken tension now yielded a clear verdict. The imagery is stark. Where once the law stood like an empty page, It is now inked with prohibition. Where once the state turned its face away, it now gazes directly. What changed was not only the law, but the way the nation chose to define itself in the eyes of both its people and the world. Yet this is only the first layer of the story. Behind the legal language lies a deeper struggle. Between silence and speech, between neutrality and declaration, between the pull of global expectations and the weight of local traditions. And so the question remains, was this law about protecting family values, or was it the first step in a broader statement of defiance? The answer lies not only in the words of the law, but in the reactions it unleashed across villages, capitals, and continents. Every law has two lives, one in the ink of legislation, the other in the pulse of society. When Burkina Faso's parliament voted unanimously in September 2025, both lives collided in a single moment. The chamber's applause echoed across Ouagadougou, but the reverberations traveled far beyond the capital. Inside the country, the reaction was neither muted nor divided. For many Burkinabe citizens, the law felt less like an invention than a confirmation of what was already spoken in homes, in mosques, and in churches. In a nation where over 90% of people practice a faith, the justice minister's phrase, bizarre behavior, struck chords that were already familiar. In villages and urban neighborhoods alike, people saw the new law as a mirror of cultural consensus rather than a sudden decree. The unanimity of Parliament was not staged theater. It reflected the convergence of political elites with the moral instincts of the populace. That domestic convergence gave the law its emotional climax. What had long been a silent assumption was now affirmed in the most formal setting of the state. For supporters, it was not merely about regulating behavior. It was about reclaiming dignity, drawing a line between African traditions and what they perceived as Western prescriptions. The rhetoric of protection, protecting families, protecting society, protecting faith, became the dominant frame. Yet every mirror also reflects another gaze, and the world was watching. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, reactions were immediate and polarized. Western media outlets framed the development as another step backward, branding it intolerance, repression, and a violation of human rights. Human rights organizations issued statements warning of the dangers faced by LGBT individuals under the new legal order. Some international commentators drew parallels to Uganda's draconian measures, while others cautioned that a wave of such laws could deepen Africa's estrangement from global institutions. Across Africa, however, the resonance was different. In Mali and Niger, where juntas had already tightened cultural laws and expelled Western influence, Burkina Faso's move was greeted as part of a Sahelian solidarity. In Ghana and Nigeria, debates already in progress found new fuel. And in Uganda, the narrative was familiar, Africa defining its path, regardless of Western critique. The sense of alignment, of belonging to a continental current, added to the momentum. This is where the imagery of a wave becomes unavoidable. Burkina Faso was not acting in isolation. Its law was a crest in a larger swell that had been gathering force for years. Each country's decision echoed in the others, not as mimicry but as mutual reinforcement. What began in Kampala reverberated in Bamako, then in Accra, then in Ouagadougou. It was less a chain reaction than a chorus, each voice distinct but singing the same refrain of sovereignty. For the international community, the situation posed a dilemma. On one hand, condemnation came easily. Press releases, editorials, warnings of potential sanctions. On the other hand, Western governments and institutions could not ignore the geopolitical reality. Burkina Faso, like its neighbors, was already drifting away from traditional Western partnerships, cultivating ties with Russia, China, and regional allies. Pressure risked accelerating that drift. Tolerance of silence had been one thing. Confrontation with defiance was another. Within Burkina Faso, meanwhile, the symbolism of the unanimous vote carried profound weight. Citizens who had long felt their traditions overlooked by elites saw a state finally aligning with their worldview. In the streets, the law became more than an article of the penal code. It became a symbol of cultural defense. For a country facing insurgency, economic hardship, and political transition, that symbolism offered a unifying narrative, however fragile. But unity is not the same as stability. Critics, both inside and outside the country, warned that focusing on cultural laws could divert attention from urgent crises, from terrorism in the Sahel to poverty and unemployment. Some argued that governments use such legislation as a rallying tool, a way to consolidate authority by appealing to shared morality while deflecting from material failures. Whether Burkina Faso's leadership intended this or not, the effect was undeniable. The law galvanized support, even as it provoked condemnation abroad. The climax of this story, then, is not only in the passing of the law itself, but in the stark division of narratives. To its people, it was affirmation. To its critics, it was regression. To its neighbors, it was solidarity. And to its allies in the West, it was a challenge. Yet, as every crest of a wave eventually breaks, the real question is not how Burkina Faso reached this climax, but what consequences will follow in the lives of its citizens, its politics, and its fragile state. A law may be passed in a single day, but its consequences unfold over years. The criminalization of homosexuality in Burkina Faso is no exception. Its effects ripple through society, politics, and international relations, shaping the lives of ordinary citizens as much as the strategies of leaders. In the short term, the law has deepened the alignment between government and public sentiment. For many Burkinabés, it confirms that leaders are attentive to cultural and religious norms. This sense of harmony between rulers and ruled has political value. It strengthens the legitimacy of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's transitional government, which has struggled to project stability amid ongoing insurgencies and economic hardship. By echoing widely held beliefs, the state reinforces its bond with citizens, creating a rare moment of unity in a time of crisis. But unity has costs. For LGBT individuals, the consequences are immediate and severe. What was once a tenuous space of silence has closed into a wall of prohibition. Arrests, fear of exposure, and the threat of imprisonment are now part of daily reality. Families and communities that already disapproved socially now feel empowered legally to enforce that disapproval. Silence, however imperfect, offered breathing space. Law replaces it with fear. Beyond the personal, the political ramifications are complex. For Traoré, the law bolsters his image as a defender of tradition and sovereignty. It projects strength against external pressures, positioning him as a leader willing to risk international criticism in order to uphold domestic values. This is politically potent. In a nation scarred by coups, insecurity, and dependence on outside aid, such defiance feeds a narrative of independence and pride. Yet critics argue the strategy carries dangers. Laws rooted in morality may rally short-term support, but they do not resolve material crises. The jihadist insurgency in the Sahel still claims lives. Inflation and unemployment still erode livelihoods. Infrastructure still lags behind need. By focusing national energy on regulating private behavior, the government risks neglecting the urgent tasks of security and development. What unifies may also distract. In the medium term, the economic consequences loom large. International donors and financial institutions often link assistance to human rights standards. Uganda has already faced funding cuts in response to its anti-LGBT laws. Rights groups warn Burkina Faso may face similar penalties, from suspended aid to withheld loans. For a country battling economic fragility, such penalties could cut deep. The irony is stark. A law designed to affirm sovereignty may tighten dependence if it leads to lost resources and investment. Yet there is another dimension, solidarity. Across the Sahel, neighbors like Mali and Niger have taken similar paths, rejecting Western presence while deepening ties with Russia and China. In this context, Burkina Faso's law functions not only as a domestic measure, but as a badge of alignment in a new bloc of states redefining their alliances. Shared defiance of external pressure becomes the glue of regional partnerships. This is where the imagery of anti-colonial Africa becomes powerful. To many leaders and citizens, rejecting Western prescriptions is not only about culture or religion. It is about escaping the shadows of colonialism. The law becomes a symbol, not just of morality, but of resistance. It proclaims, "We will not be judged by codes written elsewhere. We will not bend our soil to scripts that are not our own." Such framing transforms legislation from a domestic act into part of a continental narrative of liberation. Still, the risks remain. The balance between pride and penalty is delicate. A unified people cannot alone substitute for investment, trade, and global networks. Traoré's government must now navigate a narrow road, affirming sovereignty without collapsing under isolation. Every step carries weight. The civil and political consequences, then, are not limited to the present moment. They reach into the future, testing whether Burkina Faso can sustain both its moral stance and its survival in a globalized order. If successful, the nation may inspire others to follow. If not, it risks becoming a cautionary tale. A country that chose defiance but paid too high a price. But no nation moves alone. Every law written in Ouagadougou echoes in Addis Ababa, New York, and Geneva. The next question is how the world will respond and how Burkina Faso will answer in turn. No law exists in a vacuum. When Burkina Faso's parliament voted to criminalize homosexuality, the decision did not stop at its borders. It entered a global arena where values collide, alliances shift, and sovereignty is weighed against international expectations. Regional bodies were the first to react. The African Union issued cautious statements, balancing respect for national sovereignty with reminders of continental commitments to human rights. ECOWAS, already strained by the political rifts in the Sahel, found itself divided. Some member states, especially those with conservative majorities, expressed understanding. Others, under stronger Western partnerships, warned that the decision risked further isolation for Burkina Faso. At the global level, the tension sharpened. The United Nations Human Rights Council condemned the law as a step backwards. The World Bank and international donors hinted at possible funding reviews, recalling precedents in Uganda where aid was suspended. European governments, particularly France, criticized the move. A reaction layered with the bitterness of recently severed ties between Ouagadougou and Paris. The United States, while careful in tone, reiterated its opposition to laws that criminalize sexual orientation. Yet Burkina Faso is no longer anchored to Western approval. Under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the country has deepened ties with Russia and China. Moscow, eager to strengthen its role in Africa, portrayed the law as an internal matter of sovereignty, criticizing what it called Western hypocrisy. Beijing maintained its characteristic neutrality, stressing non-interference while continuing economic engagement. In the Sahel, Mali and Niger openly welcomed Burkina Faso's move, framing it as another step in a shared struggle for independence from external dictates. This alignment reflects a broader recalibration in Africa's diplomacy. The continent is increasingly speaking in its own voice, asserting that governance must reflect local traditions rather than global conformity. For Burkina Faso, the unanimous vote was not only about morality, it was a signal to the world. Our laws are ours to write. Here, the key word resonates: African sovereignty. The law has become more than a domestic statute. It is a banner under which a coalition of nations and communities rally, insisting that sovereignty must extend to culture and values, not only to borders and armies. But the global stage is not forgiving. Economic sanctions, reduced aid, and diplomatic tensions are real possibilities. The challenge for Burkina Faso is whether its new alliances will provide enough support to withstand Western pressure. If solidarity within the Sahel holds, if partnerships with Russia and China deepen, then defiance may transform into resilience. If not, sovereignty could come at a cost too heavy for a fragile economy. If sovereignty is the anthem, the question remains: Will solidarity be the shield strong enough to defend it? The story of Burkina Faso's new law is not finished. It is only the opening chapter of a larger narrative, one that stretches into the uncertain future of a nation and a continent searching for balance between independence and survival. The road ahead is marked by both risk and opportunity. On one side lies the threat of sanctions, withheld aid, and diplomatic strain. Burkina Faso, already facing insecurity in the Sahel and economic fragility, may find itself under even greater pressure if Western governments or financial institutions decide to punish its defiance. History offers caution. Uganda faced cuts in development funding, Nigeria endured diplomatic isolation, and Ghana risked similar consequences during its debates. Burkina Faso could follow the same path, with consequences felt not only in ministries, but in the markets, schools, and homes of ordinary people. On the other side lies possibility. By aligning with regional allies like Mali and Niger, and by strengthening ties with Russia, China, and other non-Western partners, Burkina Faso could carve out a new space of autonomy. This strategy is not without precedent. Countries that resist Western leverage often seek alternative partnerships, diversifying their economic lifelines. For the Sahel, cooperation among neighbors provides not only political cover, but also the chance to build joint security strategies and shared infrastructure. What emerges is a fragile but real vision, a Sahelian bloc defining its destiny outside the familiar orbits of Paris, Washington, and Brussels. Still, sovereignty is not self-sustaining. Laws rooted in culture and morality cannot, on their own, put bread on tables or secure villages against insurgents. The true test will be whether the spirit of independence can be matched by the hard work of governance. Development, education, industry, and security must accompany symbolism. Otherwise, defiance risks becoming hollow, a proud banner flying over an empty field. The imagery is clear. Burkina Faso has planted a seed. It is a seed of cultural assertion, of legal sovereignty, of continental defiance. But seeds can wither as easily as they can grow. The harvest depends on whether the soil of solidarity is fertile, whether the rains of investment arrive, and whether the roots of stability can take hold. The seed has been planted. But will the harvest be unity and dignity, or division and hardship? The answer lies not only in Ouagadougou, but across Africa, where nations rise together or fall apart in their pursuit of freedom. The silence has ended, and a declaration has been made. Burkina Faso's unanimous vote to criminalize homosexuality will be remembered not only as a change in law, but as a turning point in how the nation defines itself. For more than 60 years, neutrality had been its quiet posture. Now, the law speaks loudly, placing Burkina Faso within a continental moment that insists Africa must govern itself, even when the world disagrees. This decision is not an isolated act of intolerance, as some headlines may frame it. It is a statement about sovereignty, the right of a people to choose their moral compass without waiting for permission from Paris, Washington, or Brussels. In this sense, Burkina Faso's step reflects a broader awakening, part of the pulse of anti-colonial Africa, where nations are determined to escape the shadows of imposed scripts and affirm their own. Yet the path ahead is uncertain. Sovereignty carries weight, but it also carries cost. Sanctions may follow, aid may shrink, and partnerships may fracture. The challenge is whether Burkina Faso and its allies can transform defiance into resilience, whether the banner of independence can be matched by the substance of development. Without that balance, sovereignty risks becoming symbolic rather than sustainable. Still, symbols matter. They ignite pride, they inspire unity, and they remind a continent long treated as an object of history that it can, in fact, be its author. The story unfolding in Ouagadougou is more than legal reform. It is about the shape of tomorrow. It is about whether African sovereignty can stand firm in a global order that demands conformity, or whether it will bend under pressure. And so the questions linger. Is sovereignty worth the price of isolation? Or is isolation simply the cost of true freedom? If one small, landlocked nation can declare its right to choose, What stops the rest? If this resonates with your sense of justice and curiosity, do not leave. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and walk with us as we follow the next chapters of Africa's story.